Katrina, if you're not talking.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Hello from Seattle. We've got at least one from India and one from Atlanta that I know about. I don't know, Gleb, where do you sit? You're in Stockholm?
Yep.
Austin, nice beard, man.
Yeah, I'm really deep in this COVID business.
All right. Maybe we'll get started, George.
Let's see. I don't see Miguel yet.
Miguel's there.
Oh, Miguel's here. Oh, there you are. Your name isn't shown. I think we should just let you take over the show, Miguel. We got some new people. Welcome, Samita, down in the lower, I'm on my screen, left-hand corner. Anyone else new?
Yeah, hi. Hi, George.
Hey.
Samita.
Hi, Ketan.
All right. Some more people.
Could Nian go first? Right now I'm having some technical difficulties with my workstation.
Sure.
And Nian, do you want to go?
Yeah.
You should share your screen.
Can you see my screen?
Yep. It's good.
Today I'm going to talk about the Flyte Egress event. So as we know, currently from Flyte propeller to Flyte main, there are a few types of events. Workflow execution event, node execution, and task execution events. These events are sending from propeller to notify about the status update when there is execution ongoing. And why would we want to get this event? Because we are currently working on our Lineage integration with Flyte workflows, and we think this event could help us to like fill in the Lineage message, and eventually we are doing some enrichment for these events, and then send to our Lineage system. That's how we saw it. And so it's very simple setup. This is how it looks like in our setup. Can you see, should I zoom a bit or?
It's a little small.
Yeah.
If you hide the themes, I guess it will give you more real estate. On the right-hand corner, press the X.
Full screen. Okay. Yeah, so basically from Flyte propeller, we were sent it present workflow start event and nodes event and also task event to Flyte main. And from there, we are currently working on a publisher which sends this raw events and to a pub subtopic. And then we will have another enrichment process, which is that they're going to be implemented in Flyte main, which is essentially just a thread, and it will enrich the execution event with additional data, and then we will send it to a streaming pipeline or another service in our slide, and this service for streaming pipeline will convert that format to our internal Lineage format. And that's how it works and how we imagine this should work. And we are working on prototyping to have this flow. And yeah, this is for our use case. And when we talk about this thing with Ketan, I think maybe it can be a more generic thing. Like we have like publisher for the all event, and then it's configurable for like if you want a workflow or notes or task executions, you will send that from Flyte admin. And then there is like downstream consumers. It can be our like enrichment process for like for our Lineage purpose. It can be like for the email notifications, and it can be other consumers. So it can be it's going to be like a fan out approach. Yeah. So the next slide. So ongoing work is like we have a PR in Flyte admin, which is publishing all the raw events, and we are defining the schemas for the enriched events. And yeah, how the like new publishers configuration looks like. It's very simple. It's like you have this section in Flyte admin config file and says like external events. We just enable that and saying the type of the cloud provider. In our case, we chose TCP, and they set the project. And yeah, and you will set the topic name and the event types. It can be or it can be workflow, notes, and tasks. And that's how the publisher will work. I guess that's it for me. Do you guys have any questions for this report?
Hey, can you go back to this is Santosh, can you go back to the wires for this event a little bit? I briefly saw that. Okay, so this is mainly for the lineage, is it?
Yes, yes.
Okay, and when you are providing the lineage, does it actually connect the execution? So does it give the data lineage as well as your execution lineage, or a combination of two, that this data was transformed, so data A got transformed to data B by this particular version of this task? Is that the level of details it will provide?
I think in our case, it's more like the note set is like a workflow, and then the data set is actually combining like chaining different workflows on the data set.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Nian, basically, I think that was my question too. Like, is it possible to get a little more insight into your Lineage service, just like so that we can see what you guys are doing?
Okay. So I think in our case, our Lineage works like this. We have basically it's all the tasks. The task as upstream. Maybe I can write it. So it's like this. We have it's basically flat structure, and task has some property called name, and upstrings. Like this could be list. And then we have an output to URIs. And it also has this field called, let me think about it. It's like data set, something like this. Data sets. What kind of it's a flat structure, and we also have an additional field but it's external. So basically saying if the this thing produce it does a lookup for external data sets. And at the runtime, it will build up the dependency. There's the service, the self were just chaining up these things. Like it will look up for like maybe another field for, I think there's another field for workflow or context. It's basically a closure about what this workflow about, and it works like this way. So it at the runtime, when you search for a specific workflow, it will grab all the subtasks and find all the dependencies for this task, and it will traverse through the graph and find upstreams using this data set like external to find dependency to other workflows for data set. That's how it works on our side.
Mhm.
So is this the question here? Is this for visualization and like discovery, or is this more than that?
It's a bit more than that. So we have actually another layer built on this Lineage system that does our internal stuff, like for like data sets. Basically, we're having some alerting and system for the data sets, and they are using the Lineage for like figure out what is upstream and downstream and just visualization is one use case, and there are other cases.
Santosh, you had a question? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering. So, I mean, based on my understanding, there is a Flyte execution ID, and you can pretty much chain the intermediate data sets as well as what versions of tasks have operated on them. So I was just wondering, like, why is that insufficient and you have to generate these event-based? So like, what's the delta that this event-based lineage is creating? Because from my perspective, that was solving substantial amount of problems. So what I'm not clear about is that what are those extra new issues that you have for which event-based lineage is going to be a good solution? Does it make sense, the question?
Not, I'm not entirely
I
sure,
can give
but
it a try.
yeah,
to answer.
maybe you can try.
Yeah.
So one thing that our Lineage service has that isn't available in Flyte is an internal model. So there is an internal model that has the concept of a workflow. This is not a Flyte workflow. Internal model that has the concept of a data set and assignment to ownership. And then you can imagine the case when there are two teams and they interact between each other through publishing a data set. So one team publishes the data set and the other consumes it. And their workflows are not really connected. Actually, one team can be using like a completely different processing framework or like different service accounts. And like, for instance, a case, let's say there is an incident management situation when one team has a problem and they need to communicate with all their downstream consumers to say that, okay, don't wait for data. In the next 3 hours, we have a problem. So like they can actually do this because we track this information. And they can also, let's say, announce like a break-in change. So let's say we are going to break this this way, or we want to add this new feature to this data set.
Got it. So if I'm correct and if I can summarize, like an execution of an end-to-end workflow is already chained by default in Flyte. What you're trying to chain now is that a number of these workflows together, and potentially it's not only about lineage, but it's about proactively figuring out alerting and monitoring too on top of that. Okay, that's very clear. Thanks.
And I actually, Gleb and Nian, thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to add one more thing. So the eventual goal of data catalog was to reach in this direction. So whatever you guys do and like we learn from you guys, we would love to see if we can incorporate at some level within data catalog and with some other open source community systems like maybe a Munson and things like that, right? ODPI and so on. So I think the event work is useful beyond this even. So it's just an amazing thing. So thank you.
We have actually investigated the data catalog, but the thing that why we chose the event is because we have to pull the data catalog like frequently to get to fetch what's happening here. So why would not? So we decided to go from the other approach, like when that's happening, we should get the information immediately instead of just polling. That's why we chose to use the event instead.
Yeah, one way to put that would be that you guys already have a mature infrastructure, right, at Spotify, but most of the other companies don't. So probably we could help that through, data catalog. But this is awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. This is great.
Stop sharing here. Do you guys have other questions regarding work?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Miguel, are you ready to go?
Yeah.
You ready?
Here, I'll go ahead and share screen. Can you all see my screen? I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Miguel, you might want to give everybody a little background on what L5 is, how you're different from Lyft.
Yep. So level 5 is essentially Lyft's autonomous vehicle division. Basically Lyft's effort of producing their own self-driving vehicle software. We are, I guess the way I kind of phrased it was at an initial point kind of a startup within a larger organization. And we didn't necessarily adopt all of Lyft's infrastructure. So we kind of basically started from scratch. And about, I don't know, year and a half ago or so, reached out to the Flyte team in the rideshare core organization about deploying Flyte at level 5. So we manage our own Flyte deployment outside of rideshare, which is the core Lyft. It's essentially everything related to the app. So we deploy Flyte on a managed Kubernetes service via EKS. And there are a couple of distinctions between kind of, I guess, most of our normal users and their workflow. This is largely because we also use a monorepo. Most users, about 80% of the users at level 5 basically interact with this monorepo we called AV software. And in that monorepo, we basically use BAZEL. When people first, I guess when level 5 was first starting, majority of the people coming in were from Google. So this is also kind of why the monorepo decision kind of got started. And then BAZEL is basically the open source version of Google's build system. It has multi-language support, support for building containers, and supports custom rules. Basically each, and I'll go more into examples, but each kind of, you define a build target, and each build target corresponds to a rule where it will basically run some sort of, like it basically essentially compiles or interprets the code in that specific language. So it handles all that for you. And you can write your own, which we kind of did for Flyte itself to better support our users. And as kind of far as some of the use cases, and basically we have a perception metrics, which is, for example, you make a change in the perception stack, you want to then run that same perception stack across a fixed data set, see if you incorporated any regressions or improved those baseline metrics. ML automation pipeline is something that is currently ongoing. Basically, this whole process from the data gets ingested from the car to S3, that triggers then some derived data, then there's some scene selection, basically which scenes are kind of valuable to train on and to generate a data set once that data set is generated, run it through a specific model, and then produce new weights, and then run metrics again, and this ongoing process. And so before this used to be manual. Now there's been a huge effort to basically automate this with Flyte. Scene generation is also one use case of Flyte. Basically, all the scenes are basically just a start time and end time that gets captured by the vehicle. This could either have different representations, could be a image, LiDAR, point clouds, or just radar, or a combination of all of them. Most of the time it's a combination of all of them, which basically then that they generate a scene and kind of store it in a database. For example, doing searches like, hey, give me a scenes with bikes, or give me scenes with pedestrians. And as well as data set generation, just on Kaggle, there were 2 data sets that were used by Lyft that basically with the data that was generated from the AVs. And both of those large data sets were Flyte was being used to generate those, Flyte and Spark. So these are some of the use cases, and kind of one of the complexities is you have this essentially code that's running in the car, but you also want to run in the cloud. Most of this code is C++, and BAZEL itself is honestly pretty good at very great at C++, building that. So that introduced a lot of complexities. The original workflow was you basically publish an artifact from this AV software repo, and then in a separate repo, you would download that artifact. Most of the time it's a Debian package into this other, basically install it into your workflow code in a separate repo in your Docker file. Now, that caused a lot of pain points from users because I make a change in AV software in this one repo, publish it, go to this other repo, update the version, test, and then something fails, and I have to go across multiple repos and do the same thing. Publishing these artifacts isn't as fast as we'd like, but so that introduced basically a use case for our own custom Bezl rule, which in this case, a user would basically, similar in this one single monorepo, AV software, would define their workflow. This is the old syntax, but we are working on migrating to the new. And then they would define a pi binary target. So this is just a standard Python binary target that you would define in any other regular Python file. And then afterwards, you would define this Bezl rule called AVS workflow. And here, these are a couple parameters that we kind of specify. Name of the target, something just needed. Main, so this is kind of your main Python workflow code. Spark, whether you leverage Spark or not, it'll use a different base image, whether you specify true or false. Which domain you would like this to be registered in, the name of the actual workflow, workflow packages. This is kind of similar to the Flyte config file, workflow project, and then just workflow engine pi binary. Now, under the hood, what this all does is actually builds an image with your workflow code and all its dependencies, and then also will then basically register your workflow with Flyte, and then prepare a script for you to kick it off. So before I dive into a quick demo, any questions? Okay. So here is basically, I have my total records workflow, and then I have my build file, which where I define my AVS workflow target. And essentially, to build this, I would basically run avctl build -- build artifacts, and then specify the path and the name of the target. This should be pretty quick because I ran it already beforehand. And if I do, so here we can see actually the image that got that was built, And this also got published to our Artifactory, which is our Docker registry. And if I decided to instead treat this with run, and this also went ahead and already registered it as well. So run basically just makes a call out to the Flyte CLI now that it's all been registered and everything with Flyte. And here I launched an execution. We spit out an execution URL. And here it is running. And then, and that would basically be it. So a user would then just kind of make a modification to their workflow, go through the same process, build, run, and it dropped down from like hours, I guess, developing for our core users to a couple minutes. And in some cases, there have been some optimizations around Docker layering to within less than a minute. And then we're also hoping to integrate like fast register and fast serialize, seeing how that works and experimenting with all these use cases. But we also expect the new Flytekit SDK to help improve the developer workflow, because they no longer will have to run this workflow or this AVS workflow when they want to test locally. They can just run this Py binary just like any other Python file. So we had a demo to a couple of our users and they were pretty excited about that yesterday. And that is about it. If anyone is interested in the actual kind of implementation behind the scenes, it's kind of this file. You define a .bazel file, and then you use Starlark, which is a kind of like not as great Python is the way I describe it, but and then basically all of this is kind of all the magic underneath the hood of that one target.
That's awesome. Question: when are you going to open source this?
I'm hoping once we do the rewrite now with a new what's it called, the new Flyte, new Flytekit.
Awesome. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yep.
How does it work if I try to, like, if I have like my commit, I change some workflow, and I try to register workflows that I didn't change? So
register
like, does
workflow.
it basically hash like if I didn't change something, does it hash it, or like would it register a new instance?
For right now, we actually enforce a git commit every single time you make a change. And that's just for the same reason of traceability and kind of no easy way of getting a version. That will kind of, we're in talks about trying to find a different way of doing that with fast register and fast serialize. So we're hoping that version was already there. So.
Yeah, and Gleb, what happens is because he's created a single BAZEL target per workflow, BAZEL is very smart where it'll only like serialize and register that one target, right? If you change it. So BAZEL does this caching stuff, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it'll only compile, I guess, its dependencies. If I make a change in something that isn't relevant, it won't basically rebuild.
Yeah, I was more curious. Like I used very little of BAZEL, but I know there is some hashing mechanism that tries to make a reproducible builds, and it would be great like if just everything would be integrated with this hashing mechanism as well. Like so, like you can just run the build, it would register everything, and if nothing needs to be registered, it's not going to register it.
Yeah, I think that's what it's doing, right? In his demo right now, it didn't register, right? When you rerun the BAZEL target.
when I rerun, it doesn't re-register because it's already essentially built. Like what it at the end of the day, it produces kind of a final shell script that then it gets invoked when you do run, and that shell script kind of sets up things like Python path and everything like that. And it, I guess, does I'm not sure about the internals, but once it calculates like it's already been built, it will just not go through that whole process again.
Yeah, as far as I remember, it was built on the idea of the Ccache stuff in GCC. So basically, when the object files are not updated, that's where it started, but it grown well beyond it. So it computes the entire graph and figures out what's changed and what's not. And so Gleb, though, on the remote side, it's okay, right, to re-register because it's idempotent on Flyte admin. But yeah, if you could reduce the network itself, it would be pretty awesome. But you could completely, delete the workspace and recreate it, and Flyte admin will recover the state because it has its local remote state, so or remote state rather. So
yeah, because it's kind of a problem today for like big repos if they don't have BAZEL, that you have to, like, let's say you have a CI process and you have to rerun everything basically, because you don't really know what has changed. You don't have a good modules in the system.
Yeah, that's,
so like, let's say you have a repo with 100 tasks and each task has integration test, you have a problem.
Yeah, we get that for free with kind of BAZEL and leverage as much of BAZEL. BAZEL also provides like container rules that we use kind of to build out the Docker image. Pretty much try to, basically, it's taking all these like rules that are already open source and try to bring them together as much as possible to define the entire registration workflow. There's some custom stuff that we do, but it's very specific to like the register command and Flyte specific stuff.
Yeah, we would love this to be open source. So one of the Lyft internal users working on pricing or something had 400 workflows and 1,000 tasks or something, and then the registration time would take started becoming more and more. Like it's like initially it was like 10 seconds or something, and it went to a minute or something, like, or 30 seconds, and so that becomes a problem at some point. And so, and mostly users are not really changing everything, right? They're just changing their bits. So, but finding the diff is extremely hard. I guess. What's next on the agenda?
Next is you, if you want to do planning for, just sort of open up the floor for what's going on in the core.
All right, so I guess I won't take too long, but I just want to share what are I, Ketan, and Katrina, and like a few folks within the new company I'm working on. So we have been focusing on getting like the first use scenario and FlyteKit, the new API, really in a way that the users find it extremely easy to adopt. And this includes documentation, and this includes the process of figuring out what to do next, tutorials, cookbook. So, and I think we envision that we'll continue doing this for the next 1 month. One of the great things that, an idea that Jeev came up with, and I think I would love for Jeev to demo this some point here in this conversation, is at Freenome, they have like a testbed environment for Flyte, where every user can just like clone a repo and hit a button, and they get like a local cluster or a remote cluster within one namespace in a Kubernetes, in a shared Kubernetes cluster. So that way, every user has their own Flyte deployment where they can learn Flyte, and that's really I think awesome. And so Jeev has been very gracious, where he's contributed some code which can help us get the initial time from 0 to start to be less than, with Flyte, less than a minute. So we are coming up with goals. So we have about 5 goals. One is a user should not have more than 1 line, or they should not need to use more than 1 line to get started with, let's say, FlyteKit or FlyteKit Java or so on. They should not need to use more than 2 lines to get from there to a cluster running locally, or an existing Kubernetes cluster, and not more than, again, 2 lines if they want to use just 1 namespace. And the total time for all of this, we want to be less than 2 minutes. And having examples deployed into that cluster and running those predefined examples. So that's our goal, and we are going, and literally with the timer on, we want to go with that goal so that users really can get to from 0 to running a remote cluster in no time. And from there, the next thing would be to actually use a cloud hosted GCS or S3, and then slowly add more production readiness to the cluster. So with that goal, we started working on. That's why for the last 2 months, if you've seen, we have not done a lot of releases. We only did 0.10. One of the other reasons is because FlyteKit, we're really baking it. We're completely changing the onboarding experience. But that doesn't mean we're not working on other things. So let me share a screen. What I did is I wanted more folks to easily contribute and know what we're working on. So I updated the roadmap documentation. Again, if you've seen this part, the entire getting started and roadmap and everything is getting an overhaul. We'll share probably in the next meeting, the new structure. But till then, in the roadmap section, we do have upcoming features and issues. And what we've decided is that we've created labels now so that you can just click on each of these issues. And that should pop up only all the issues related to that label. And I've cleaned up the labels. There were some weird labels and we removed all of them. Now that we are in Flyte.org, we can actually set up bots and we can do all kinds of things that we should have done earlier, which was very hard under the Lyft organization. But here we can. So for example, if you're interested in, let's say, getting started, and then I think these are, great first issues. The other things that are great to contribute on are plugins, and I'll go through some of them. And there are lots of features requested, and you want to see if users are interested in more features. So please contribute. On that front, there's an open source highlight. Praful, I don't think he's on the call, but he's been working on Flyte.ctl. He's added a lot of features to it, including register and so on. So Flyte.ctl, the goal is that Flyte.ctl becomes the one CLI and idea would be to brew install Flyte.ctl, and from there on, your journey begins with Flyte. So it's very streamlined. And and Uraj, both of them have been really going great with Flyte.ctl. So thank you for all the open source contributions, and please keep on working on them. So if you're looking for things to do and or add more issues, I'm actually in the process of updating the issue template. So you can actually select, this is a UI issue or whatever when you create the issues itself. But if you're looking for issues to work on, these are bugs, and these are good first issues. And most of the Flyte.ctl ones are great first issues. Actually, it's pretty straightforward. And if you don't have any, if you not have a lot of Go working knowledge, that's okay. Flyte.ctl is one of the best ways to get started with Go, in my opinion. It's really well defined, easily testable, and then I guess most people who I think Praful never had worked with Go, and I think hopefully he's convert now. He's liking Go a lot. Same thing as plugins, and if this is one of the areas where we want to really focus on specifically, because we see a lot of users using different sorts of data stores or hosted services. And I think some folks are working on, so I think there is a Flink plugin that's in progress at Spotify, and there's a BigQuery plugin. We added a plugin for Athena. So what Ketan did recently is he created a simplified interface and this documentation is coming soon too, but creating a web API style interface. What that does, sorry. There's the interface. Oops. Yeah, so you just have to implement. Oh, this is complicated. Where is the interface? So I'm trying to find the interface. Sorry. So there is a very simplified interface. If you want to integrate a new web API plugin. Oh, sorry. This is. Yeah. So if you want to integrate a new web API, any web API in the on the internet, you probably just have to implement this one interface, either if it's an async plugin or if it's a synchronous plugin. So synchronous here means that you call and the response is returned immediately. Or if it's an async plugin, means you you launch a job and you wait for the job to done. It takes more than a few milliseconds to complete. So in that case,
then your screen isn't updating.
Oh really? Again?
At least for me, it's not.
Which part are you looking at? It shows me green.
It's still at the roadmap.
Yeah.
Oh.
Me too.
I don't know what to do then.
Maybe reshare your screen once. Maybe that will work. Disconnect. Yeah.
So maybe also Ketan's here. Ketan, do you want to quickly explain Web API interface before?
Sure. If we have the time. So let me share my screen. Hope I have a better luck at doing that. Share screen.
I shared again, but it doesn't work. The Zoom is not perfect.
Well, nothing is, I guess.
Yeah, anyways, my meta point being, if we run out of time, is that please pick out the issues, add more issues if you guys are working on it, and now you should be able to assign an issue to yourself. Just go ahead, assign it. We will have better contributing guidelines throughout the entire project, but right now we are small enough and we can move quickly. We do have a lot of hooks and lots of issues there. And there are lots of great first issues, so please go for it.
I am unable to share my screen as well.
Ketan, for no, okay, never mind.
Did that work?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, sorry. Who was saying? Somebody was asking something.
It's okay. I'll ask later.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the interface Ketan was talking about. There are two main interfaces here. There's an async plugin and sync plugin. The async one is, well, as the name suggests, if you have a service you want to integrate with that it's async, so you issue a create request once and then you monitor it in the background, and once the request is done, if it's maybe a long running job or a query or something like that, and then so you need to implement these methods. The sync one is obviously much more simple. The expectation here is we call this once and it works. The thing to note about sync plugins is we will call this in the, I would say, the critical path of executing a workflow. So this should not be an expensive operation. We expect a network call, obviously, but not waiting for or a sleep waiting for a query to execute kind of thing. For those, you should definitely go with the async plugin. The rest of the interfaces here that will get passed to you, that give you, like, to your methods, all the context about what's running, the task, and so on. And I have added that link to all the issues where we need a plugin. The other thing we also added is an implementation for one of the async plugins. It's for AWS Athena. It's a Presto-based engine running on AWS that developed by AWS, and this is all you really need to do for, like, or I guess similar to this. It translates the Flyte lingo, so from Flyte like tasks and proto buffers to Amazon's own library, Boto 3 whatever library, to call the service and so on. So yeah, if you have any questions, like we did add a list of plugins that we think are useful based on conversations with other people and based on conversations with some of you. But if you have a need for a different plugin, please find an issue, work on it, and we'll be happy to answer any questions on the open source channel. And back to you, Ketan.
Oh yeah, and one more thing I wanted to add is like writing a Flyte kit only plugin, and I think some people may have questions on this. Like, let's try and understand what is a Flyte kit only plugin and what's a backend plugin. Maybe it's a rehash. A Flyte kit only plugin is where you don't, like, everything can be written as a Flyte kit only plugin. You could have written Athena as a Flyte kit only plugin. The reason why we didn't write it so is because that has an overhead of running a container, and that is not always preferred, because with the total number of containers, as it increases, it actually causes Kubernetes to have a problem. There's lack of visibility into the container, cleaning up resources is harder, and so on. So, but that doesn't mean you can't start off with writing Flyte kit plugins. And so Flyte kit plugin writing is actually even easier than it was, and it can be done in a separate library. You can just make a new library, you can publish it completely into PyPy, but if you would like, you could also write that library as part of Flyte kit. There's a plugins folder, and then there are some plugins that are just purely syntactic sugar. And one of them is Neil's actually added one, thank you, which actually is not only like it brings in great value along with syntactic sugar. One of the value here is like, checking and making sure that the data frames are correct. And probably Neil, maybe you should like, probably you have to add an example or something so that you can walk through it with for the folks here. The other one, if you're interested in writing like that, is Gleb and some other folks have talked to me about this. Is Wakes, is a different data frame format for out of core data frame processing, and that may reduce the need for using Spark in many cases, because I've seen Spark misused in many cases in the world, where you have like 10 gigabyte of data and you're running a massive Spark cluster. It's not needed. So that might be a great place to start too. That's it from my end.
I think that's all we have today.
Hey, George, one thing. So I see Soren here. Soren, would you be open to doing a deep dive or a conversation next time about Helm and Customize? I see that we are talking on an issue. And
Sure. I could do that. Yes, totally.
That'd be
Yeah,
awesome.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Super. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. We'll same drill. It'll take a while to get the video sort of ground up and posted, but I'll ping the channel without a here when it's all done, so you can forward it to anybody that missed the meeting that wants to see it. And then we'll see you in a couple weeks. All right. Bye-bye.